So we're back from our adjournment yesterday. So we're now down to, actually I think what we were going to do and start with is, first of all, some apologies, I think, Jude. We have to note some apologies for today. So we've got Councillor Forsyth's an apology. I haven't heard from Councillor Gallagher. He may be an apology.
I haven't heard from Councillor Gallagher nor Councillor McPherson, and Councillor Wilson is now attending for today.
Right, okay. So we certainly have an apology recorded for Councillor Forsyth. So I'll move that, seconded by Councillor Mallett. All those in favour? Right. So if you could record that, thank you.
I was just going to say, I've got a text from Martin saying he's on his way, so...
Right, late?
Yeah, so
yeah,
I guess we can ask him to
I guess it's sort of a standard thing, isn't it? So,
we all back each other, don't we?
yeah, that's right. So, councillors, we got yesterday. We got through the activities of the council, and we're down to part C. But I thought yesterday, given the discussions about where we were tracking with budgets and the I guess the challenges of growth, and now that we have our asset management plan sort of completed, the Chief Executive thought it might be a good idea if he just did a bit of a recap yesterday, and I guess also possibly clarified a few things about you know, how the last budget was developed, because I think that might be helpful, particularly for new councillors, and perhaps under sort of getting a bit more clarity around some of the terminology and some of the moving parts that make up the whole of the budget. So I'm going to hand over to Richard to do that. Okay, Richard.
Thank you, Your Worship, and good morning, councillors. Yeah, the Mayor is right. The word I was going to use in terms of introducing just you know, it won't be too long, a little discussion this morning is clarity. To provide some context to the 2012-22 10-year plan, as well as some context to the process we came to for the preparation of the 2015-25 10-year plan as well, and why we presented a draft budget for consideration that ultimately reflected what was discussed yesterday is some small increase in the debt to revenue ratio and some concerns were expressed. So I just wanted to provide some context to that, Jude. So firstly, I'd like to talk about the 2012-22 10-year plan. I've got some slides up on the screen here, and I apologise for them being wordy, but I did write this in, after the session yesterday, so it was just a case of some thoughts. So one of the high-level messages I want to get here is the previous council did a great job in preparing a 10-year plan based on a robust financial strategy, and I acknowledge that as the cornerstone of that 10-year plan. And I have preached to a number of organisations the benefits of doing so. So that was critical. One of the comments that I would make is the 10-year plan itself was built in the context of an interesting environment at the time. There was the global financial crisis, and we didn't know where New Zealand was going to come out of that GFC at, and we didn't know where Hamilton and Waikato were going to come out. So the premise of the 10-year plan in 2012-22 was laid on some foundations of some uncertainty. We also had some issues in that reflected our population statistics, and our growth projections were based on the 2007 census. The census was due around about, that would have provided information for the 10-year plan in 2011, was delayed due to the Christchurch earthquake. So again, some critical information that we use now to make some evidence-based decisions was lacking at that point in time. The capital program itself reflected what I'd say a limitation in some data sets. We had some asset management plans in some places of good quality, but in other places they're sketchy. I'm talking about the entire organisation. And what we did to achieve our financial strategy, we basically made some decisions that were based on limited data at the time, but resulted in extensive cuts. And when I say limited data, that the asset management plans were not necessarily there as a robust evidence base in terms of some of those decisions. We're also in a position where there was some uncertainty amongst developers. Demand was low, and they weren't, as they are today, ready to go. And I'll talk a little about the current scenario as well. So a key comment for the 2012-22 10-year plan is the capital expenditure that was included was critical expenditure only, and those that were contractually committed. So it was a very defined set of principles that were put into place. That's the context for the 10-year plan in 2012-22. As we move into the 2015-25 10-year plan, things have changed. We've revised the financial strategy. We've suggested in the report we revised the financial strategy. And I'm not going to get into the debate here and now about our communication mechanism for aspects of the 10-year plan, but the underlying strategy pillars remain the same with some revision to the debt to revenue ratio. We do have sound population growth, which is a critical part for our infrastructure and our community teams in terms of understanding what the growth demands are and what population pressures are going to be in certain parts of the city. It's a key aspect, and that's based on good census data, but it's also based on the Nadir information. And Natalie Jackson's done a lot of work in terms of validating and challenging that information. And councillors were privileged to actually hear Natalie Jackson's views on where our populations were heading in terms of a number of in terms of one of our early 10-year plan sessions as well. So that's a robust point as well. What we have is a capital program that reflects robust asset management plans, and one of the key points now is that we have clarity of what is important and where the risks are in terms of our asset base. And now that we know, we need to address those risks. We simply can't ignore it. So one of the premises and drivers that the senior leadership team put into this 10-year plan is making sure the asset management plans were robust. And if they were robust, that we actually communicated in a clear and succinct way the risks associated with those items within the draft budget, and we believe we've done that. There's a greater activity by developers, and developers are probably in a position whereby they're actually some active decisions, they're getting development underway, they're engaging with us on a proactive basis. So we're previously, in the last 10-year plan, I'd suggest there was potentially passive engagement with developers. We probably now have far more proactive engagement with developers, and developers probably trying to lead development in the areas where previously that wasn't the case. There is an expectation that council delivers growth. Feedback in various community aspects is that there is the expectation we meet the challenges of growth, and that whether that be the infrastructure or community infrastructure and so forth. So that's there as well. The district plan has a number of zone cells, so we have indicated through our district plan a number of areas that we believe are right for growth, and effectively through that district plan have enabled those. And we also have now legal clarity around what is core infrastructure, and effectively the message was yesterday, just to reiterate that, if we've zoned land to go, there is an expectation on council that we will meet a certain level of infrastructure spend in the delivery to enable those cells to progress. And it was clearly articulated yesterday that if we don't, it does present some risks. And one of those risks is suboptimal development outcomes, in that the developer may well progress in a way that doesn't actually meet council's expectations, or it may result in less development as well.
Richard, what drives that? Is it you say legal clarity, so is it the law that says that? Or
The Local Government Act places an obligation on us to provide core infrastructure, and we've had a legal opinion in terms of what is core infrastructure, and if you want some more detail, I could ask Chris to provide that clarity.
Yeah, that would be useful.
Yes, yeah, so that comment was about the upsizing. So the Local Government Act did put some real specific clarity in there about developers not having to pay for infrastructure beyond what they need for their own development, whereas previously, when you go back to 2012, the legal context was different, and we were looking to get developers to pay more than just what was required for their development.
Okay, and that contradicts the wrong word, but that is not quite in variance with that nowadays community infrastructure you can't charge DCs for. Now, community infrastructure, I think, is pools and libraries.
Yeah, but parks.
Parks are still required. So, okay, so, yep.
So you're talking about the definition now that applies to development contributions, which was a change in the legislation last year. Yes, that's right.
Yes, and we know now no longer permitted to charge for libraries and pools.
Yes, that's
with
right.
the
It's
DCs.
lists specifically in the legislation now what you can include as community infrastructure, and that's public toilets, Blair.
Public toilets, it's local playgrounds, and it's some element of sort of halls, but it's sort of community buildings, but very, very limited, extremely limited.
So if we decide to build a pool or
Library.
a library, that would be our community making that decision, and we.
can't
It's
do these.
about a level of service rather than a requirement.
We could certainly continue to levy past development contributions that had a community infrastructure levy portion of that, but any future new development contributions under the policy couldn't take any pool or library monies.
Okay.
And that came in, Blair, the change to the legislation came into effect, what date?
It came into effect, I think it was August last year.
August
Yeah.
last
Yeah,
year.
I remember being told about
Yeah.
that.
Can I
It's just not quite clear when you. Yeah.
Yes, can I just check with the change in the law for the core infrastructure, that came in last year, year before?
That came in before, prior to that. That was with the
The change in the
definition of
Local
purpose.
Government Act and the purpose,
Yeah.
wasn't it? Yeah.
I think there's two parts. When the purpose changed, it strengthened the whole definition around infrastructure and core network infrastructure. It was then further enhanced with the development contributions
Yes, that's right.
amendments, which added some further granularity to that. All of which are backing up to what the Chief Executive is saying, that the role of council is very much around network infrastructure and what we should be providing versus what developers should be providing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There is just ongoing increasing legal pressure around compliance, and an example for that is, for example, the gas scrubber we put in at the water treatment plant and so forth. So there is ongoing pressures. This 10-year plan had a focus on waters. Through the asset management plans, I'll go into that in a little bit more detail on the next slide, but through our asset management plans, the risk associated with our water network was identified. And previously, I'd suggest we were at the edge in terms of our spend in our water area, and we're making sure that that the spend we've put in place here for waters steps us back slightly from that edge to actually ensure that we are not exposing ourselves to unacceptable risk. And waters are the big drivers, and I'll talk to that in the next slide as well. The last point I want to make is on this slide is the budget is largely growth related and renewal related. So that is the growth conversations that we've had previously and those particular challenges there, as well as renewing across all of our assets to ensure that they actually maintain are maintained from a level of service point of view over their full whole of life. That's 89%. The other 11% predominantly is still in the infrastructure area and its level of service, and that's about upgrades to our existing infrastructure and plants to ensure that we meet the needs of the current community as well. So it's significantly an infrastructure-focused plan. Thank you, Jude. So what we're left with and what we presented to you reflected the 10-year plan tension, I'm calling it. And on the left, that is the financial strategy in the current 2012-22 10-year plan. And just excuse me, I want to give you the page number so you can validate where I got the numbers from for those that wish to do so.
Trust but verify.
Sorry?
Trust but verify.
Well, that's the work. I'm comfortable with that approach, Councillor Mellett. So on page 6, table 2, which for councillors that are using the iPad is about paragraph 7.3, there's a table there that shows the total overall debt levels compared with the debt to revenue ratios. So what I've said is the financial strategy, if we follow the debt to revenue ratios from 2012-22 10-year plan versus the costs associated with the capital program that's in front of us today, there's about $50 million worth of incremental debt over and above what would be required if we were to achieve the same debt to revenue ratios from the 2012-22 10-year plan.
This is over 10 years?
No, that's for those 4 years in the middle.
Right,
For the 10-year period, we actually come down below the debt to revenue target of 200%. So at the end of the period, we return to it. But the comments were made yesterday, there were periods, and there's 4 years here that we do. And that is, if you look at that table 2 on that page, there's variance, favourable, unfavourable, 4 rows of negative numbers at the bottom of that table as well. So that's indicating that. And what that does, it basically reflects there is ultimately a trade-off. What we have on the right side of that graph is an infrastructure plan which is heavily focused on renewals and growth. As I mentioned before, supported by asset management plans, we've brought forward, we believe, a robust capital program that reflects an acceptable level of risk. When we went through this asset management plans, and when we first did it, we categorised our capital spend as low, medium and high. And basically, some of the items in the low category never even made the cut in terms of being presented to council. We went through quite a rigorous process to ensure that what we presented to you reflected an acceptable level of risk. And like I mentioned before, waters was a key focus, and a significant reason that this 50 million exists is in that period of 2017-18 through to 2021-22, there is significant expenditure in that area. We had a number of sessions, and through those sessions there was definitely an intent from this council that we would consider the growth within the city, and one of the key focuses that came through in this 10-year plan was to enable growth as best we can, bearing in mind the fiscal constraints of the previous financial strategy. We got to a point, however, where it was a case of weighing up the risk of not investing in this critical infrastructure and meeting these growth expectations versus the risk of revising our financial strategy for those 4 years to exceed the debt to revenue ratio and revise it by a small amount. And that's the tension that we played through, and that's why we presented the balanced, the unbalanced, let's put yesterday, budget to you yesterday. So it is definitely a tension that we're well aware of, and very much why we presented a revision or requested a revision to the financial strategy for those periods.
Sorry, Richard, just to be really clear, what you're saying is that this is what has caused the current 10-year plan to vary significantly
from a debt to revenue ratio point of view.
Because if you look along there, you'll actually see 14, 15, 15, 16, they're all well above 200%. But that was always expected, wasn't it?
That's correct.
So you're just highlighting.
Yeah, that's right. And if you recall those graphs, in fact, the graph on figure 6 on page 7, which is paragraph 7.13, there's that red line, and that red line is the debt to revenue ratio, and that's effectively the red line that's always been expected that we would head towards and trend towards the a debt to revenue ratio target of 200% by the end of the 10-year period. But as noted yesterday, the actual debt to revenue ratio based on the composition of the balance sheet and the profit and loss statement is about 166%.
Just a question on that. The figures would look even worse if we hadn't have sold those assets.
Yes.
So it's not just 50 million. To get a true figure, you need to take the 50 plus the assets that we've sold.
This slide here is comparing the debt to revenue ratio compared between the capital expenditure we have against what the debt to revenue ratio would have been if we maintained the debt to revenue ratio from the 2012-22 10-year plan. And all along, Councillor Wilson, when I presented the annual plan last year and the annual report this year, I made it extremely clear that I was driving to maintain the debt levels down as low as possible because I knew full well of the challenges of growth and knew full well of the challenges of asset management plans. So you're right, they have been factored in and they would have been bigger.
Sure.
But
So you
Yes.
are saying
Yeah.
that if we had lived to the plan that we put in place and the strategy, and in fact had sold the assets that we had, the figures would be significantly improved.
I'm going to just slightly vary that from my perspective, and we can agree to disagree. We set the 10-year plan for 12-22 with a list of asset sales. We always looked at that we didn't bake the numbers into the plan.
Correct.
Absolutely, and it was about building resilience. And I'm saying right here and now we need that resilience to ensure that we can actually deliver our assets to the community, and that's why we presented what we presented.
We've spent the resilience.
And because we needed to.
But I just think we need a clarity. The asset sale program was embarked upon to reduce debt. That is why we decided. Right? That is why we looked at asset sales to reduce debt, and that's what we agreed to.
Yep.
You know, that's why we agreed to that program.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely.
To give us some headroom I think the words you used was to enable us some headroom.
I can't remember my exact words, Councillor Wilson. You've obviously got a far better memory than me in that. But look, that's probably right, that we certainly, as a council last time, understood that it was very important that we reduce the debt balance, because we knew, those councillors that were here in the last, that when you put in place an austerity type budget as we did last time, that, you know, we would be facing challenges into the future. So we embarked on the asset sales. Yeah.
I think the implication of what Ewan's saying is that there was some money in the bank. We called them, they were assets, and through, I'm not debating at all the decision to do it, but the context has changed now. That money in the bank's no longer there. It's been spent so as to reduce the debt.
It's been repaid off the debt.
Yeah, repaid the debt,
That's
correct.
correct.
And and most of council's assets typically are not money earners. So often in this, although in these cases they were, I think there was a BNZ Bank and things like that.
No, most of them weren't returning a good yield.
Yeah. Okay.
Quite right.
So in fact, that's probably improved our operating condition, certainly reduced the complexity of the organisation, and reduced the debt. So, but Ewan's point is still correct that some. You know, the nuts we had in storage for the winter, some of them have been sold now, haven't they?
I don't
That's
know.
a bad
I've never
analogy.
heard that terminology, but I think
We used to do it when we were
what this
in the
discussion
post office
is about
savings
is,
banks.
yes, we sold assets. Why did we sell assets? To reduce debt.
No, and I'm not
Yeah.
contesting that at all. I just think that what Ewan's trying to get is that, and I might have muddied the water a bit rather than helped.
Probably. All right, carrying on. Okay.
Yes, I want you to refer to page 5 of the pre-election report, 2nd of August 2013, and page 6, which refers to asset sales. Now, in terms of assets, it does go through assets sold, assets approved for sales. There's no mention of pension housing, interestingly enough. But under the debt, basically it just says debt was projected to rise 833. Get that. The council's 2012-2022 10-year plan addressed this by reducing capital expenditure, etc., and capping total overall debt at about 440 million for 10 years. And you'll be familiar with this. And then it also goes on to say that by 2022 it is planned that council will have borrowed about $1.80 for every dollar collected. So they're talking about a ratio of
180%. Yes.
So just, I need you to talk me through that paragraph, right, in terms of the pre-election report that was published by staff,
By
and
council.
the graph at the bottom of page 5. And I certainly, when I went to the election, very good pamphlet, I have to tell you. This is my sort of, won't say manifesto, but this is a statement to me, to electors, to say this is roughly where I want to go with your endorsement. I actually was endorsed, I got re-elected to council, but I was certainly using this particular graph on page 5 of the pre-election. So I just want to, if you see where I'm coming from, I just want to relate
So what's
the two.
So what's the question? Sorry.
Well, the
Councillor?
question is,
Yep.
we have said in a pre-election report that we're looking at capping overall debt at about $440 million for 10 years. That's point one.
So
and
what's,
then
what's the question?
well, the question is, I want to relate these new figures to that pre-election report.
So
Can I just finish my presentation?
Yeah.
I think that'll, at some part, answer it. And I think also, just to make it very clear, the comments I made about everything we did in that pre-election report was done in the context of the 2012-22 10-year plan. What we've done now, we have more robust information, and there are some challenges to our financial strategy, which this tension on this slide here is talking to. So if I continue to progress through this, you understand some of those
Yes, I think
tensions.
Sure, and that's what I'm trying to right.
Okay,
this
so-
is not a shock horror probe question. It's
No.
just wanting to tease out.
Yeah, so Councillor Geller, what I'm hearing is, let the CE finish his presentation and then let's take questions at the end of it. Shall we do that?
Okay, sure.
Okay, let's do that.
Yep.
Can
So,
we-
Your Worship, just a procedural point, if I could. Where in the agenda was the CEO's presentation?
It's
I-
not on the agenda.
Right.
So
'Cause
what he's
I
doing
was
is-
under the impression we were coming back today to continue
We are.
where we were.
Yeah, we are.
And usually the CEO, if he was doing a presentation, would have done it at the beginning of the meeting yesterday. So I'm just interested to understand what suddenly changed overnight that made you feel you need to do this presentation now.
There were a number of questions unanswered yesterday in terms of the challenge between the financial strategy and effectively what we can do about bringing it down within the financial strategy.
Right.
So the next few slides are about options by which council has in front of them to actually balance this tension.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
so that's
so-
it's effectively responding to questions asked yesterday.
Cool.
Yep.
Can I ask a follow-on question from Ewan's
Yes.
about where we are at the moment? Ewan was asking about selling down of assets, which made our book look better. Are development levies included in the debt cap and the debt of where we are?
Yes.
And development levies have gone way better and way far in expectation of what we were ever budgeting.
From a timing point of view, we've collected more sooner than we expected, but over the 10-year period, the respective it'll balance out over the 10-year period. It's expected to.
Well, the GFC's gone, things are booming, and development levies are pouring in. Would you consider that to be correct?
Yes, and we've made an assumption about our development levies, which is still conservative, but it's more aggressive than it was last time.
And these things generally work in a 20-year cycle when we have our boom-bust cycle. So we've
I'll
got a
have to-
very
yep.
good 10 years in front of us from everything we can see. And yet we're still blowing our budget on what politicians promised at 440 million by $35 million
So-
on
so-
top of selling assets and on top of huge development levies coming in, far more than what we budgeted for. We're still being presented by staff a budget which is $35 million above what this council, which 7 people in this room promised at the last election, leading up to the last election and signed off on.
So Councillor King, thanks for your summary there. So can we let the CE go through what he wants to share with us based on what councillors were raising yesterday, which was, what levers do we have to change what the staff have put in front of us? That's essentially the question yesterday. So can we let the CE tell us that? And then I'll take your question. So let's just let him finish and then do your questions, all right? So
Yeah, I'm
no-
just
thank-
wondering why we're being presented with a budget that can't balance by $35
So I'm
million.
going to let the
And
CE
to be
finish
honest-
his presentation and then I'm going to take questions.
So,
So can you carry on?
so this slide reflects that tension. So if I can go to the next slide. So basically, we've got some options. And the first one, I'm making it very clear before I start, it's not a recommended position, but these are the options purely just based on how you move these things. We could review our financial strategy. And if we review our financial strategy, the two that make a difference in the context of affordability of what I'm saying here is we've got some core critical infrastructure we need to spend some money on based on the asset management plans and growth, and we could increase the rates. That improves our balanced budget target, increases our debt capacity. It would be acceptable to Fitch, but it's unacceptable to the council and the community. I'm not recommending that. There is the increased debt to revenue target, and effectively that's where we've come through in discussions from yesterday. It has no direct impact on balanced budget, however it does indirectly impact on interest costs. It does allow for greater borrowing to meet capital requirements, and small increases are acceptable to Fitch. However, for them it's about bringing it down to an acceptable level quickly. The community is largely interested in rates increase, and that's a qualifier there. Some part of the community are interested in our debt levels as well. It's only recommended, and this is the key point here, it's only recommended if the infrastructure and growth risk outrates the financial risk. So if we're in a position where the risk associated with not spending money on infrastructure means that we will expose ourselves unnecessarily from a risk point of view, would it only go here and it would only be in a small amount.
Julie, can I just have 2 questions of Richard? No?
Look, I think I'd prefer if he does his presentation and then ask the question.
Thank you, Jude.
I shall write them down and remember.
Write them down.
Yeah, good
Absolutely.
Try and remember what they were.
Yeah. So then the other side, and this goes back to those 2 arrows clashing together. I just talked about how you can look on the financial strategy side and make adjustments there. What I did last night is I went through the entire budget again. So I went through from top to tail. Some questions were asked yesterday about what we can do. the big part is the reason why we are challenging our financial strategy by a small amount in those 4 years is to do with the growth and renewals, and predominantly in the infrastructure area. All other areas within council, effectively the renewals budgets were consistent with the 2012-22 10-year plan, and that reflected the extreme amount of rigour that went through at that period in time. The area where we're not consistent with that is in the area is the waters area. So we're talking about water supply and wastewater, and stormwater to a degree as well. And that's because the asset management plans have effectively provided the context that if we don't spend money in these areas to an acceptable level, we are going to introduce some risk. However, we can reprogram growth-related expenditure. There are some impacts on that. So that was and this is just a comment made by Chris yesterday when asked by Councillor Wilson, what can we do? This is the area that would have one of the bigger impacts on our ability to manage our books. It would impact on our ability to meet our growth demands. There would be a potential impact on relationships with developers. We mentioned before, thank you Chris and Blair, in terms of the legal obligations to provide core infrastructure. And there is an increased risk profile. There's potential economic impacts, legal revenue impact, and that's effectively the yield. There wouldn't necessarily be as much development there for our rates and our development contributions impact in that area. And a potential impact on affordable housing if there's these growth sales aren't opened up, and a potential disincentive to investment. So we haven't recommended that in this 10-year plan because we believe that the growth program is already at a very bare minimum position, and any further tweaks to that will have a large impact. The next part of it is, and I mentioned before, the largest impact is the reason why we had have that 4 years whereby which we exceed the debt to revenue ratio from the previous 10-year plan was in the water and wastewater area. All other areas have been held true to their, for most part, to the 2012-22 10-year plan renewals numbers. This is the area where there's been a significant increase, hence the impact. And so if we, there is a challenge could be made to staff to review the renewal spend on water and wastewater. That's not $67 over the 10 years, that's $67 million over the 10 years. I dropped an M. A reduction in spend could lead to asset failures and reduce plant resilience and increase our risk profile. And Chris made it very clear through a number of sessions that previously we had underspent in this area and that we need to actually spend it. So they're the two largest potential ways, if council wishes, to address the debt to revenue ratio in terms of large chunks of money to spend. I did look further, and if we flick over the slide, I kept going because that was the intent. So there is the decrease the Integrated Transport Initiative Fund. We spent about $900,000. Key point I'm making here is what's left is small fry compared to the impact of the infrastructure for growth and water and for renewals and so forth. So we're starting to get down. This is a minimum spend already. It would impact on our relationships and expectations with various groups, and it is a small impact. And because it's a small impact, I've suggested not doing anything in that area. I went through and with my black hat, and I asked what was truly discretionary. And whilst we have an obligation to develop a waste minimisation and management plan, we could well revise that plan and not progress with wheelie bins. And that would have a $2.8 million impact in 2016-17 and a $3 million impact over the 10 years. But I still note that it's a small impact when we're looking at $50 million in that period as well, but I'm looking at stones here. If you flick the page, please. In terms of a level of service discussion, and a lot of this is about levels of service, I considered whether or not the cross-city connector Heafy boundary intersection, even though the amount is small, and I did a comment there about reshuffling of capital. What I mean is it's the timing of it doesn't quite time up with my gap. Would have to, with the gap that exists, would have to move that around. It would be a small impact, but it's something that council consider because the impact there is increased congestion and traffic transit times. So there would be a definite level of service discussion there as well. I looked through other aspects. I re-looked at some of the proposals that council, the funded proposals. For example, the Wi-Fi, I had a look at that, whether or not the additional funding in there made sense and whether or not it was justifiable from a needs point of view. A significant portion of that funding is required because the copper wire will be obsolete. And if we don't do it, the operating costs will increase because we have to pay broadband. There is a small aspect of it, and it's probably a one-off payment of $100,000 that we could not spend. It's 200,000 gross, but it's a transit-funded, NZTA-funded item, so that brings it down to $100,000. So I looked at that as well. So the key message I'm trying to get through here is up front is the 22 plan was done probably based on some limited information in terms of the quality of the asset management plans at the time. We've now done those asset management plans and we have identified some significant risks if we don't address them. And if we don't address them, I had to weigh out that risk of not addressing them versus the financial strategy risk. And I acknowledge the reputation risk of the community commitment we've made, but I've had to sit here and try and work out that balance. And the intention, as I mentioned, that came through from various sessions within council is that we don't expose ourselves from an infrastructure point of view, and we don't expose ourselves from a growth point of view. So the challenge has been asked is why did I present the budget as it is? And my view as the Chief Executive, this represents a balanced view given those significant risks on the infrastructure front side. And I'm happy to take any questions.
So, can you just put the slide back about the water, this one here? So I just need clarity. You're saying that these are the two big spend areas?
That's correct.
So these are the areas we need to focus on?
In my view, if you want to move the dial, I did put up, originally one view was all renewals could be challenged, but the renewals in the areas apart from the water and wastewater had been significantly impacted previously by the last 2012-22 10-year plan, and reflecting they reflect asset management plans with a little bit of risk built in. There would be a significant amount of risk built in if we started approaching those. So these are the last two that I believe provide the biggest opportunity should council wish to balance the financial.
So what's the risk? You've got the increased risk profile. What is that on the water?
That's really talking about the previous point. Above that is asset failures and reduced plant resilience. And I could ask Chris to provide some more flavour on this one if you wish me to.
I've got some questions, Your Worship.
Could you just provide some more flavour on that? Then I'll come to the questions.
Certainly just
Can you speak into the mic? Thanks. It's better, we can't quite hear.
Yeah, just reinforcing what the CEO has said, that the risk profile is related to the line above. There's very detailed programs that sit behind these renewal budgets for the water in terms of critical components of the plant and pump stations. So that the risk of not upgrading those at the optimum time is failure of those assets.
So what does failure mean?
Failure means that they fail, like a pump station would fail, and then
So what happens though?
what happens? The pump station overflows. So they all lead to compliance risk for us, which is the big issue in our wastewater business, is compliance risk. So a lot of our programs, our spend investment is relating to compliance issues. So it puts us at higher risk of non-compliance.
Right, okay. Okay, questions? So Gary, you, questions?
Just thanks, Your Worship. Very early on, and I've said this before, we talked about the rates increases being 3.8. I'm just concerned that deliberately or not, we are playing a bit of a game of smoke and mirrors by using these targeted rates. I think we just need to say to people, we are breaching our financial fiscal policy, because it's not 3.8, it's 3.8 plus $11.50 for the gardens, and at the, I don't know if it didn't pass yesterday, did it? But the suggestion was it was also going to be a $60, including GST, targeted rate for the weedy bins. So It did pass,
Did
did it?
pass.
Okay, it did pass, there you go, yeah. So we just need to be transparent.
Yep.
Yeah,
And point noted.
okay, so, yeah, so we just accept that that's not, thank you.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
that's your
No,
question?
that's all
Oh,
my
okay.
point.
Councillor Wilson, question?
Yeah, look, thank you for your presentation, and thanks, Chris, for your comments. Tongue in cheek, Chris, I'm beginning to think that maybe we should call you the $50 million man, because this appears to be all around water infrastructure and your needs to future-proof. But here's my question. There is a natural tendency to paint the doomsday type scenario if we fail to suddenly embrace every aspect of this asset management plan. Fascinating that we spent a number of years without an asset management plan, but now that we've sort of developed it, we must implement it all at once. But here's the question. In the 4 years that we violate or blow the cap, I remind you that in 2022 through to 2025, we're well below the cap. What about this? Would it not work to move the expenditure slipping by 4 years? Or are you still suggesting that as a result over a 10-year plan, if we slide these a few years, that suddenly all the pumps are going to stop working and everything that we know about our infrastructure is going to unravel?
So Chris, I think...
That's a really good question.
Chris, can you answer that? Basically, it's timing. Councillor Wilson's raised a very good point.
Can you move the...
Timing.
4 years.
Yeah,
Chris.
move it out 4 years.
So
You'll need to stand up. Sorry. It does pick you up, though. You don't have to lean over.
So, look, I would reiterate what I said yesterday. I think the investment in our citywide infrastructure and our headworks is critical, and I would be I wouldn't recommend any deferral of expenditure whatsoever in investment in our critical citywide infrastructure. I'd come back to what I said yesterday. If you were going to move things, growth is the area that you would have a look at. But in terms of the bulk of the investment in our water treatment plants, our renewals, I'll just emphasise again, it's absolutely critical that we continue to invest in our core infrastructure assets.
So, sorry, Councillor Wilson did ask a question, though, about timing. Are you saying that the timing you put in this, because it's a good question, the timing of when these things are to be done cannot be pushed further out?
That's correct. And if there's anything negotiable, it'll be in the growth area and working with developers, but not on our core infrastructure.
So, Councillor Wilson, follow up, is it?
Follow-up question is, if that timing is so critical, then why wouldn't you recommend moving it forward a couple of years where you've got some headroom? If this is so critical that you can't delay it a year or 2 years or 3 years, why wouldn't it be prudent to have it pre-funded in the years where you have some headroom?
So that's 15, 16,
Yeah,
16,
you've
17.
got some slack there. If this is so critical, Chris...
Yeah, he's got the critical.
So if you look at the program, there's a lot of pre-work to do in terms of scoping the work to do and getting the right solution. So if you look at this program, the next year is certainly about investigating and scoping and making sure we're doing the right things, bringing up the business cases. The expenditure really starts on our treatment plants about 16, 17, but next year is all about getting ready to do the right work and the right things.
Just one further question.
So sorry, so as Coralie, I can't bring back the physical works, into the early years.
Okay. So, just so that I'm crystal clear, the way to resolve this is to curtail the growth, which the CEO has told us will trigger a series of other events. You've suggested that we may be in legal violation of the Local Government Act, that there is a a breach of an expectation of developers that they've gleaned from our structure plans.
So what's your question, sorry?
I'm just wanting to clarify, is that so Chris has said,
You're asking
don't
about
play
the risk-
with my lot,
Yes.
you need to play over here.
Well, he's saying growth is where to go, and you asking about the
Correct,
risk
and now I'm
risk
going to
profile.
growth, and I'm now saying,
Yep.
but we've been told by Blair we can't play with growth because we would trigger.
Yeah, so what's your question, I think, Councillor?
I
Is
just
it a
want to
risk
clarify.
question?
I just want a clarification.
Yeah.
Because I think you're going to say that that's right. That if we play with growth, we're violating. You're suggesting your interpretation, Blair, is we're violating the Local Government Act, and that developers have a legal right to assume, based on our structure plans, that those growth events were going to occur in terms of
So
infrastructure.
the question is that correct? Is it?
Yes.
Okay, so I guess, is it UCE or Chris to speak to the slide about growth, the risks associated with not investing in the growth as you have put forward in this plan, basically, isn't it?
That's
how
right.
How real are those risks, I guess the questions is. And I think they're good questions to ask as well.
I'll ask
What
the
are the
team to respond on that.
consequences of not doing it, really?
And obviously, in the context that it would be only for a period of 4 years. We're pushing it. It's not like we've suddenly decided to turn our back on all of our structure plans. We're just simply implementing a delay strategy.
Thank you. So
So I'll ask the team to give the specific details.
is that you, Chris, or who is the person that's going to answer the investment in growth? And why that?
And the legal parameters you work
Yeah,
with,
it's
because
the risk-
they've articulated that.
It's the risk profile, which includes all of those things as I've read it. So who's answering that? Is it?
I can answer it at a high level, but with a
Yep.
bit more detail, I have to ask
So why
Chris
don't
to
you
do it.
go with the high level and then we'll get into the nitty gritty, depending on what it is.
So from the risk profile, as I see it, is the comment I made previously. We have an expectation has been set in one hand from a legal point of view, which is the process.
So just clarify the expectation. Is that in the structure plan?
I'm going to have to ask Blair to respond to that part.
I think through the structure plan, through the district plan, we have zoned and opened up multiple areas of the city now for growth. So council will recall through our presentation that we workshopped some months ago, we have multiple fronts that are active at the present time.
So Blair, is there a legal opinion from the city's solicitor saying that if we delayed that by 4 years, that we open ourselves to potential legal challenge?
There is very clear advice from the city solicitor that if we do not provide certain types of infrastructure, and you'll recall the hierarchy of infrastructure we talked about, that...
But in context of 4 years?
In the context of
a
any
delay.
reasonable period of time, that we then expose council to the very real risk that developers will seek recourse through the court process that may allow them to bring their own infrastructure solutions to the table, which may be suboptimal. And I guess this is where Chris can talk about what those consequences would be.
So just expanding on that, Blair, so that we understand. So what does that mean? The developer can take a case about that. Where and how does that
Developer
work?
could through the Environment Court seek to get I guess a ruling that their particular development could proceed, that we are unreasonably withholding their development proceeding because we're not providing infrastructure when that area is zoned or set aside for growth, and that they believe that they have an appropriate solution to mitigate that.
Right.
And of course that solution would be at odds with the infrastructure planning and overarching direction that Chris's team have set for the city, and I guess...
Blair, would you be happy to circulate that legal opinion, particularly, I'd be fascinated to look at it, particularly in the context of the fact that we're only suggesting a delay over a couple of years?
Sorry, Ewan, I don't think he was saying that. So I agree. Let's have a look at the legal opinion.
Yeah, let's get an actual legal
can
opinion.
We're just expanding on that. So that, are you saying that means that they could go to the Environment Court and say, well, this is zoned and the council are not funding their infrastructure requirement, so here's our solution, which could be an on-site solution, and the Environment Court could say, okay, I'm happy with that solution.
That's the advice and that's the risk parameter that we're working with, yes.
Okay, so how real is that risk? Because that means that the developer is ready to go and it's we're the only impediment. So how real is that risk? Because, you know, basically we've got a budget with lots of stuff investing in growth. And we're trying to understand here, how real are those sorts of risks really?
Do you want to, as you,
I mean, because the way I see it, Rotokauri and Peacocks are the two areas
Chris,
that are...
Chris may be able to answer that one just because he's closer to the
Yeah,
actual growth
okay,
pressure on the
thanks.
ground.
Look, I'm not sure I can answer that because that will be up to the developers, but look, we do work with developers, and we are looking at, they're proposing solutions where they can get their growth away, and they're providing probably suboptimal outcomes for us. So those suboptimal outcomes over time will probably be increased risk or non-compliance for us in terms of our wastewater pump station overflows. Because what it will result in the wastewater area is a lot more pump stations than what we would normally have if we had a good strategic wastewater system. So they are compliance risks for us, and suboptimal in terms of ongoing operational costs as well when these solutions get vested in us.
So they
the
get
risk of
vested
them-
back to us and then we've got to maintain them all.
Effectively, yes.
Right.
But whether a developer would go to the Environment Court, it might be more likely, perhaps, that they'll decide it's uneconomic for them to do their development and not proceed with the development.
Okay, right, thank you. So there was so that was one of the risks, but there's other risks in that. So can you speak to the
Yeah.
rest of those, please?
Yeah, so we're talking
Yeah,
about...
I'll get to you, but we're just getting the explanation on this.
Yep. So the revenue impact, it just talks to, as I mentioned before, the rates, yield, development contributions.
So what does that mean, though? Just
So if
extrapolate
so-
it out so that we're clear what that means.
So
Does that
if
mean
a
less
develop-
DC revenue.
Yeah, so if a developer doesn't progress with the development, or they put their own solution and it may be less intense from an intensity point of view, so therefore there's less ratepayers, there's less development contributions received and so forth in that respect as well.
So are you saying then there's a risk that the budget that's been put in for a revenue line on DCs could be compromised? Am I extrapolating that out correctly?
There is some risk, but just bearing in mind with development contributions, if you remove the underlying asset that you have to put in because the developer's paying for it, there'd be an adjustment to the development contribution revenue as well, and
Right.
no asset with it. But yes, definitely it's a yield aspect. The affordable housing aspect, it's the fact if there's less land opened up, the demand or the supply and demand argument,
Right.
there's a risk.
So by that you're meaning if through us not putting infrastructure and it constrains supply of available sections, that could affect prices.
And it goes to that point in terms of where the Productivity Commission is heading, and Brian mentioned yesterday, was it spade ready land, ready to turn the land over. So if it's zoned, but it's not actually provided with infrastructure, they can't get the development away, it's not spade ready at that point.
Right.
And then the last part is a disincentive to investment, and it's pretty much touched on by Chris's comment that developers may choose not to develop their land.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so Councillor Wilson, just coming back to you, is that covered off the points you wanted to ask?
I've only got one final question on this. So I understand your concerns about, I don't agree with them, but I understand how you've painted the concerns. You've referred to potential legal litigation about these individuals who had an expectation that things were going to occur, the developers, based on the district plan, etc. Do we face any legal threat from the thousands of Hamiltonians who will have read the pre-election report and all the other documentation that this council has circulated? Million and a rates increase of 3.8 in light of the fact that that's just not going to be true, that the 440 is going to be blown, the 3.8 is in fact going to be 3.8 plus 10 for the gardens, $68 odd for wheelie bins. Do we face potential legal litigation for what would appear to be misleading the people of Hamilton in the form of a document not issued by some electoral promise. I mean, I could refer to the Mayor's speech where she says in her electoral promise the 440, but actually the council issues a legal document under the Local Government Act.
So, Councillor Wilson, I think
Yeah.
your question
You got
is,
the question?
can there be, yes, that's a long-winded way of asking the question. So I think, let me just make sure I've got your question right. I think your question is the pre-election report is prepared by the CE and staff. Is there any legal challenge to that?
And all the other multiple documents, Your Worship.
Yeah.
There are multiple documents that this council has issued publicly.
I think you've been clear on that. Like in the past, Councillor Wilson, yep, all the documents the councils in the past have issued, yes.
Yep.
Is there a legal challenge to those?
I want to ask Blair to respond to that one.
Simple answer is no. The long-term plan is the appropriate place to have this community debate, and provided you follow the appropriate process through the long-term plan, you're entirely able to go to the public with a variation to the financial strategy. That is the long-term plan process.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Mallett?
Thank you very much. And I agree with a lot of what Councillor Wilson is saying, but ironic that the only guy that's getting any heat today is Chris on our annual report, our annual plan for this year. Page 11 has how your rates will be spent. 54% are spent on Chris's areas, 46% is spent elsewhere. So I do hope we bring
what's
some.
your question?
My point is, are we actually putting the focus on the activities as well, which is arts, city planning, city prosperity, city safety, community services, democracy?
So I think
The thing that
your
concerns
question
me,
is-
the thing that concerns me, is we've brought up this this doomsday scenario, which I think is may concern a number of councillors, and I would be concerned too if I
But
thought
what's
that.
your
My concern
question?
would be
What's
if
your
this is the
question?
only thing we can address, we're in deep trouble. But
so what I'm asking you, Councillor Mallett, is what's your question here? This is an opportunity to test what you've heard. What's your question?
Yeah, my question is, are we putting the same rigour
Right.
that we are applying to things which I call core business, which are the first things that money should be spent on, as opposed to the other stuff which is less core?
Can you answer that, please?
Absolutely. So we've yesterday we went through those other activities with an opportunity to look at the capital and so forth. So that was the opportunity to challenge those. I put these up based on the big changes from the last 10-year plan. So that's why these were isolated. It wasn't a case of picking on Chris, but it was that these were the big movements as to why we'd gone above the debt revenue ratio for 2012-22 10-year plan. But you're absolutely correct that there is Chris represents, and based on those numbers, half the business, roughly. There is the other half the business that council can challenge on. And I looked through the entire budget last night looking for opportunities to do so.
So I guess the question...
the other stuff.
And I suggest that's the process that we're going through.
Sorry, Chief Executive, can you answer the question that, as I heard it, has the same rigour been put over the other
Yes.
aspects? So the answer is yes. And what is the outcome of that in this budget? I think I thought you had a slide up there that said something about it's the same as last.
Yep, so effectively the majority of other areas have been held true to their 2012-22 10-year plan budgets, and any changes have been noted in those activity statements that came through in the descriptions as to what those changes are.
Okay, I've got... Oh, sorry, Councillor Gallagher?
I want to go back to the pre-election report, 2nd of August, 16 months ago. And this is not a shock or a probe question, but just let me finish and give context to the question. A document like this is obviously a very important document, and you know, obviously there's a faith that this is a neutral document, politically neutral document, right? And 10-year plan part of it, the balancing the books part of it seems fine. The rates part, in terms of the situation, it seems fine. It's just the debt, and even talking about asset sales seems fine. So what I just need to explain to me is just two things, is that context, you know, the debt, the descriptor there, which talks about where things seems to have changed from that paragraph now, and just perhaps the main reasons why that is the case. What was not foreseen in August 2013, right? Because there's, you know, in terms of a change.
So what's
then
changed?
I have a second question around if we sent you away to try and look at what were the options to meet the original targets, what you might need to do. So it's just, would you comment on that paragraph on page 5 of that pre-election report?
Yeah. So ultimately, it was the first two slides that I presented this morning. So if you go back,
Can you
please
go back, help me here?
Yeah. So one more, please. So what's changed is that in the context of the 2012-22 10-year plan, the information was prepared on the best available information at that time. We hadn't completed our asset management plan process. And so if we skip forward one, the big difference here, and growth was another issue. Growth, the GFC, there wasn't a huge amount of growth, but in 2015-25, we do have developers pushing forward, and that comes down to the reason that I've highlighted those. Not that I'm picking on Chris, but the growth is one of the bigger levers that's driving this. And our asset management plans are informing us that the level of expenditure required to ensure resilience within our water and wastewater areas, as well as a few other areas as well, but the significant ones, require a significant increase in expenditure. And that is the reason why the debt to revenue ratio in this plan exceeds for 4 years what was in the previous plan.
Just repeat that if you would, because I think that's critical. If you would, please be patient with me. Just
Which
repeat
parts,
that.
Councillor
Just
Gallagher?
what you've just said, because obviously there's two bits. How much did we anticipate, you know, in terms of the staff, you know, the economic growth, which I
Yes.
thought, because there were what I'm getting, there were things that perhaps were not anticipated, you know, because that paragraph is a kind of a forecast, right? You know, it's a bit of crystal ball, I accept that.
So ultimately, the 2012-22 10-year plan was premised on very little growth and not having completed our asset management plans to identify the optimal point of investment in our network. The 2015-25 draft plan that you see in front of us reflects a better understanding where growth is. Growth's impact on the city is far greater, so therefore more infrastructure investments required, and asset management plans are indicating that we need to invest predominantly in our water and wastewater area to ensure that those assets are appropriately maintained.
So does that, I think that answers your question, Councillor Gallagher. What's changed? Which was a good question.
Well, perhaps we'll say that, but this is not trying to beat up people, trust me, it's just 13 months ago, 16 months ago, I would have assumed some of this could have been predicted with respect. If we said to you as CEO, the will of this council, we are still minded to try and see what we can do to live within in the broad parameters, you know, in terms of financial disciplines.
What's out? That's what you're saying,
you know,
isn't it? Where would you go?
Go away, but not make stuff here on the hoof. So I don't want to shoot Chris. Last thing I'd want to do, but obviously, you know, calm considered, not to do an overnight deal, but, you know, come back in February and what might that look like to try and get us a bit closer. Because it doesn't seem to me it's not an all in or all out, but that surely is not impossible.
Keep going. One more.
So, Chris, can you answer that question?
Well, you've given us some options there, but obviously I think one would assume they need to be teased out a bit more.
So what are the sort of things, not, you know, you're not on the spot here, but it was a question that I had.
What is crucial to me is I don't want to put you in an overnight having to, you know,
No,
just go away for a couple of months and do some further.
We couldn't do it overnight. It would be a flawed process. But Chris, can you answer that question?
Yeah, at the risk of repeating myself, look, we've looked really extensively at our budgets. They arrive at you when they've had a lot of scrutiny in terms of optimal spend. Once again, I go to the growth area. Your council has already asked us by resolution yesterday to look at Rotokauri and looking at bringing that forward. That one's actually an example of how tough we have been in terms of our programming. So we're not starting Rotokauri stage 1 to year 7. We've got a development community that want to start now. So in terms of being able to move the growth program around, we've already been quite hard in terms of and an eye on the financial strategy. The opportunity is there when we're looking at giving effect to that resolution from Rotokauri to really look once again at the growth program. But outside the growth, the budgets that we've asked for are very, very significant, very important in terms of meeting our compliance and just our obligations for core infrastructure.
And so ultimately, if we were to go away and come back, it would be about what level of risk we would introduce through any review. So what Chris' point is saying, if any movements in growth or renewals, and in terms of the questions I was asked previously, would introduce some other form of risk into the 10-year plan.
All right, and then it would be a matter of whether we accepted that risk.
Yeah,
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
I mean, obviously, I think where we may be going is to ask you, obviously, of course, you come and consider it all the time, but to go back and do some further work to see if we can get closer to some of those broad parameters.
Right, so are there any other questions on this?
Yeah.
Yes, sorry, Councillor King, yes. Questions on this for the CE?
Yeah. Are these the same staff who are presenting this budget who presented 1 year ago the pre-election report?
Yes.
What's happened in 1 year?
The pre-election report legally is required to respond against the 10-year plan.
You made us all look really good coming up to the election, but what's changed between now and a year ago? Where we said in that report 440 debt cap, where we talked about 3.8 rates.
In the last few months,
12 months. All this has changed in 12 months.
Yeah, so you're
the
asking
GFC
again,
was over 12 months ago.
Sorry, Councillor King, you're asking the same question that was asked by Councillor Gallagher, what's changed? So would you
No, my question was that the same staff who wrote those
Yes,
reports,
and
the
the
same
answer
staff
is
who wrote
yes.
this report a year later.
And the
Yes.
answer was yes. All right. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor McPherson.
Wouldn't it have been a fairer strategy for the councillors that are concerned with the issues that have been raised this morning to have presented alternative proposals or even a range of proposals between the pre-election paper, 440 million cap and 3.8% rates increase, and what we've actually been proposed here, so that councillors could judge for themselves and not have to, on the hoof, suggest cuts that might achieve that debt level. So I'm asking through you to the CEO, in terms of us being, it appears to many people, I would suggest, that they've been presented with a fait accompli because there's insufficient information in front of us now to be able to tell what a $440 million cap would look like going into the future, for instance, or a 3.8% rate increase, or both. And when people are now asking you about the possibility of going away to do that, wouldn't it have been better to have done that and said, here's the two alternatives, stare at them and you can decide what direction you want to go? Because I would have thought that the council instruction, though it wasn't done in so many words, was to prepare us a budget for those original figures, not for the new figures. I'm not sure where that instructions come from.
Yep, so when we went through, and if we went to that slide with the arrows on it, ultimately we have done our best, and there's been a significant angst in the last 6 months, well, not even that long, sorry, last 4 or 5 months, to try and make this fit. And we're getting to the point where we believe we're actually starting to expose, by decisions to remove certain capital items, we're starting to expose council to unacceptable levels of risk. So while it may look pre-baked, it was effectively our position in terms of trying to manage that risk profile. And to your original question, I mean, that was an option in terms of forcing it to equal that and then highlighting the risks of doing so as well. But we thought we did that in the way we presented the unfunded expenditure within these items as well, showing the items we'd removed and the funded items that could be unfunded. So we think the information is there to enable this debate.
So are you saying then, just on that last particular point, that none of the funded items in your proposal could be unfunded, could be shifted to unfunded, by way of example? Or?
Well, no, ultimately what we've done is we've highlighted the risk within those proposals and a statement of that risk. So if council's tolerance for risk is different to our perceived tolerance of that risk, then those items can be moved to unfunded.
But the problem, isn't it, for councils who may wish to do some or all of that, to bring it down to that level, is that they don't have a good sense, because there's no staff report covering this, of the priority, which ones you could cut, which ones you couldn't, that would stop the wheels of the city turning.
Well, that's why maybe we have to disagree on this, Councillor McPherson. The way that this information is presented has a comment say risk of project not included, and I fully expect if there was an item there that either you did or didn't agree with the risk, because you may know more than we do.
Sorry, that's not the point I'm making. Separately, yes, there are those comments, but judging them all together, which ones are what's the priority order of those ones?
Yep, and so that's I think, I haven't made this very clear. We had, and I mentioned it before, we had 3 levels of priority: low, medium and high, and we went through and assessed that. And basically, a good chunk of the lows don't even show up in front of the councillors today, because it wasn't just worth even bringing that to the table. And the mediums are effectively unfunded, and the highs are funded. So that was our priority setting, but we've included that information so that you can make that interrogation of us to understand it a bit
So
better.
picking up on Councillor McPherson's point, which is a good one again, you're saying that, and in fact I think in this report you set out how you have done that prioritisation, which I think is on page, in this main report.
It's at 11.3.
11,
What page
Prioritisation.
is that?
11.3.
Page 20 in the hard copy, probably about 23 in the
23.
soft copy.
So what you've done on there is you've set out how you have prioritised the projects. And it says there, priority 1 projects, which I'm assuming are the red high risk ones. It says essential to meet our statutory obligations, essential to meet mandatory codes or
Yeah.
standards, contractually.
But there's a large group, Your Worship,
Yes.
within that, and that also, that little statement there, or that
Yeah,
outline,
no,
doesn't address
I-
the timing issues, because there are timing variations that could change the finances as well.
No, look, I think your question's right. So what I was just saying, Councillor Wilson, is I think the report is saying this is how they did it, and they've assessed then under that prioritisation that everything they put in the budget has got a red light next to it because it fits priority 1. And so you're saying, well, are there some within that priority? Are there some that could be moved? Or had they considered presenting something that said, well, here's what 440 looks like?
Both those questions I've asked, yes, Your Worship, yep.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, had you thought of that, I guess?
Yeah, and
I guess we asked you to go away and come back to us based on, we said we supported growth and we wanted to continue a renewal program with our asset management plans. Now, that was kind of the message we gave. Now, if we're going to give a different message and says, well, can we look at a version 2? I mean, that's
I
what
just
we
have
might
to
do.
say I'm surprised, Your Worship, because I personally, going back 12, 15 months, would have probably supported the type of proposal that staff had put forward, but I understood that the mandate was for 440 million. That's what we're, cap. That's where I'm surprised by the outcome.
yep, so
And I based that on the pre-election papers we had.
yep, so the pre-election papers were based on the current 10-year plan at that point in time, and legally we had to respond to that current 10-year plan. Through the sessions, I did flag, the various sessions we had, I did flag there was, given the level of growth, we will be looking at a debt-to-revenue ratio, and it may trigger a look to increasing that debt cap beyond 440. One of the things that we have come through this is we've gone beyond that debt-to-revenue cap in 4 years, so that's here. If we were to present if a request was to present a budget that would bring us back in that line, we would have to go away and do some more work on that. But it would introduce a different sort of risk. So you've got the risk on one side from the financial strategy, and that's what that slide is trying to show, versus the risk on the infrastructure needs of the city.
When you're talking about risks, there are legal risks, there are, just
Reputational risks and stuff,
all
yeah.
sorts of different types of risks. I can recall a discussion a few years ago when councils were first informed that they should be covering depreciation in a way different from the way they had, and the legal advice we received at the time was, while from an accounting sense we should be including 100% depreciation, that I think it was Audit New Zealand would be satisfied. I don't know whether that was the word they used, but the import we took out of, if we were moving in that direction, in other words, there was a timing, we didn't have to do it all at once, we didn't have to include 100% depreciation from year 1 of starting to look at it. There were different ways of, as long as we were moving in the right direction. So that's, in some of these areas, even if it's a legal situation, one would imagine that that we can, there is a timing variation that could be looked at. So maybe that's a comment.
Yeah, I think it is a comment because I think Chris Allen has sort of responded to that in a different ways from other questions. But yeah, I think that is a comment.
It's a bit like the roading side of transport that Chris covers. They have a just-in-time approach. It's not having everything spent in advance. It's having some plans so that when it's physically needed, the changes can be made in a relatively short period of time. But that can be extended out as conditions change.
That's right. Just on that, on the just-in-time, because we moved to the just-in-time approach in the last 3 years in terms of funding infrastructure rather than putting it in and waiting. Is that, just picking up on that question, Chris, so that this, the proposal in terms of infrastructure funding for growth, that maintains that just-in-time approach, or is it something different?
It's probably more aggressive than that. It's probably just after just-in-time.
Right, okay, thank you. Now, I've got Councillor King.
This budget, we did have briefings and we did sort of talk about where we wanted to go, but we never talked about the budget and how much we were going to spend. And nobody in this room that I'm aware of was aware that we were going to have a $35 million blowout on what we'd promised until Friday night when this paper got delivered.
So what's your question?
I don't think that's acceptable. I'd like to move a motion that staff be requested to prepare a draft LTP for the 2015-2025, keeping within the 440 debt level and 3.8 rate increase as outlined in the 2013 pre-election papers.
I'll second that, Your Worship.
Right, so I just need to see if there's any further questions. Yes.
Yes, I had a question, and it relates to the debate this morning around the 440k debt cap, and it relates also to the Chief Executive presenting us with a snapshot. And I have to say, Chief Executive, thank you very much. As a councillor, I appreciated having that reminder up there to focus on the questions and the debate. And it certainly has painted a picture. So my question is probably more fundamental than Councillor McPherson. As governors of the city, is it our responsibility to make decisions that remain locked in time? Or, as governors, do we have a responsibility to take into account a changing environment? And you've covered that this morning. Because I think it's a red herring to try and bring in the election report and compare it with a 10-year plan. If I could paint a picture...
So is that your... Sorry, you've asked a question.
Yes, I have asked a question.
Can you...
Is it the governing responsibility to make decisions that are locked in time, or we are prepared to consider based on changing circumstances, changing environment, as has occurred here with the city's growth?
The latter.
To summarise that is, do we keep our word or break our promises?
No, hold on a
I
minute.
do have a question following that.
Wait a minute. I'm going to check. So that's, you've had your question answered. Did you have any other questions? No?
Yeah, I'm not sure that was a question. It was more like a rhetorical question, but it was a good one, Councillor.
What's your question then, Councillor McPherson?
The changing circumstances, in particular in relation to growth. Your answer of yes to Councillor Chesterman, Mr Chief Executive, are you by that answer suggesting that the growth 15 months ago that we're now noticing coming up in the lift wasn't anticipated?
I'm going to have to ask the team in that respect.
No census.
So
No, there's no census data. That was-
I'm not referring to the census data because our staff quite wisely don't rely on the census. It's far too delayed. They rely on things like the Waikato University School Population Studies
They get that off
projections
the
and
census,
all
though.
that sort of stuff.
Who can answer that question? It might be you, Blair. I'm not sure. I don't know who was
I
involved.
didn't exactly hear the full question, but
Well, what was the full question?
15 months ago, did we not anticipate growth in Hamilton? Weren't we experiencing at that time growth? And we've experienced obviously continued growth at the time, but certainly 15 months ago, were we experiencing and anticipating growth?
So this is in relation to the pre-election report, is it?
Yes, as to whether that circumstance has changed or not, as Councillor Chesterman
I know the
asked.
pre-election report is the Local Government Act sets out what you must put in that report. So I'm not sure what that is, but anyway, can you answer the question? If you can answer the question.
yeah, look, I think the process of developing this long-term plan started about 15 months ago, and obviously as we get close to this point in time today, our information becomes more clearer. So 15 months ago, certainly there was growth occurring, and it was active growth. But I think it's more likely in the more recent times, as we've started to certainly discuss it with the council through the briefing sessions, that all the picture comes together as the asset management plans are completed, as we understand more information from the university. So I think the picture from 15 months ago through to today is quite different in terms of our understanding and our projections into the future.
So just extrapolating that out, because it's a good question as well, Councillor McPherson, with those asset management plans then, when were they completed? I mean, the waters one's the main one.
They were completed in substance around the middle of this year. So
Okay, all right.
in time to inform the series of discussions that we've been having with
Right.
council. As
Did we not receive developer levies greater than budgeted in both of the last 2 financial years?
That's correct.
Thanks.
Right. Any other questions? No? So what I'm proposing to do is to take a break for... did you have a question?
No.
I'm proposing to take a break for morning tea, and then we will deal with a resolution which has been moved and seconded after morning tea. All right, so we're going to break now till 11:15. Right. Okay.